My name is Lawrence Vance. I am 67 years old, and for 20 Decembers, I was the man who funded a Christmas that my family claimed I always ruined. It was a cold Tuesday morning in the middle of December when the local mail carrier dropped off the mail, carrying a white envelope with a red foreclosure stamp from Oak Valley Bank. I sat in my quiet kitchen, drinking a hot cup of black coffee, holding the letter with hands that had spent 45 years framing houses, pouring concrete, and pulling wire. The document stated that I was in default on a $120,000 home equity line of credit taken out against my primary residence. My home was a modest three-bedroom ranch that I had built with my own hands 30 years ago. I knew every nail, every copper pipe, and every cedar plank in these walls. I had paid off the mortgage in full 15 years ago, right after my wife Carol passed away. The bank demanded an immediate missed payment of $400, warning that failure to pay would trigger foreclosure proceedings. My heart hammered against my ribs, a dull, heavy ache that reminded me of my doctor's warnings about cardiac strain. He had told me to avoid stress, but holding this letter, stress was unavoidable. I had never applied for a HELOC. I had never signed a single document borrowing against the house I had built. I lived on a modest pension of $2,800 a month, which covered my utilities, food, and property taxes, with just a little left over. There was no way I could afford a $4,400 monthly payment on a loan I didn't even know existed. I recalled Dr. Kincaid showing me the cardiac scan in October, explaining how my blood pressure was 160/95, and advising me that my body could no longer handle heavy lifting or emotional stress. This news was a heavy blow, and now this letter felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. Carol had loved Christmas. When she was alive, the holiday was about warmth, laughter, and homemade cookies. We met when she was working as a nurse, and I was a young apprentice carpenter helping to build the town clinic. She was a kind woman who could make anyone feel welcome. We bought our first ornaments from a small shop in Oregon in 1985, and every year we would hang them together. But after she died of cancer 15 years ago, the house became quiet. In my grief, I wanted to hold on to whatever family connection remained. I believed that by paying for the grand Christmas gatherings, I could keep the children close. I began funding everything: the venue, the catering, the decorations, without a second thought. I did it out of love, but over the last 20 years, I had spent a total of $92,000 on these gatherings, never asking for a single dollar in return. I just wanted my children to be together, to feel that we were still a family. But somewhere along the line, the love turned into a transaction, and my family began to see me not as a father, but as a checkbook. My mind raced back to the family planning meeting 14 days earlier. It was held at my daughter Chloe's house, a sprawling 5-bedroom colonial in the suburbs. Chloe is 39, and she married Jeff Henderson, 42, a commercial real estate broker, who wore suits that cost more than my monthly pension. Chloe always had a clipboard. She stood at the head of her dining table, reading off tasks like a site foreman. Her brother, my son Donald, 31, sat next to me. Donald is a diesel mechanic, a quiet boy with grease under his nails who never cared for the fancy dinners. My sister Martha, 65, sat near the window sipping tea. Chloe ran down the list. Donald was to haul the rental chairs, Martha was to bring her homemade pies, and the cousins were assigned to set up the lighting. Finally, Chloe looked at me. "Dad, you don't have to do anything this year," she said, giving the room the bright artificial smile she reserved for guests. "Just show up on time, and try not to talk about your old construction jobs like you did last year. We want this gala to be perfect." Jeff laughed, a short condescending sound that echoed off the high ceiling. "Yeah, Lawrence, let the professionals handle the presentation. You just sit back and enjoy the free meal. We have important business partners coming, and they don't really want to hear about drywall." Donald and I had spent the last 15 minutes listening to Jeff brag about a client who purchased a commercial warehouse for $2,400, making it clear that my life's work of manual labor was insignificant compared to his real estate transactions. I sat in the chair closest to the kitchen door, the one nobody else wanted, and I nodded. "All right," I said. "I'll be on time." I kept my mouth shut. I did not mention that 3 days prior, I had signed the deposit check for the catering at the Oak Ridge Inn. It was $4,500 paid from my personal account. It was the same deposit I had paid every December for 20 years. Nobody ever asked who paid the caterer or the florist. They simply assumed the holiday appeared by magic, credit to Chloe's organizing skills. As I drove home that evening, my phone had buzzed with a bank notification. The $4,500 deposit had cleared. I stared at the road, the words of my daughter repeating in my head. Try not to talk. Somewhere along the line, I had become the family joke. It had started 5 years ago when Chloe handed me the holiday turkey and told me to glaze it. I am a precise man. I took my time to make clean cuts. But by dinner, Chloe told the guests, Dad insisted on glazing the bird, and now it's dry. I told him not to. The guests laughed, and I stayed silent. 2 years ago, I shared a story over dessert about how I had wired the historic downtown theater in my youth. Jeff checked his watch, sighing loudly. Chloe patted my arm and said, Okay, Dad, let people finish their pie. I felt the heat rise in my face, but I did not defend myself. The pattern was always the same. They would belittle me in the evening, and the next morning Chloe would call. Her voice would be soft, almost sweet. Dad, the catering bill ran a bit over. Can you cover the extra $800? Just to smooth things over. And I always did. I paid because I wanted to feel like I belonged. I had spent 20 years paying to be tolerated. Holding the foreclosure letter in my kitchen, the fog finally cleared. I looked at the details on the statement. The loan had been approved in May. I remembered May. Jeff had volunteered to help me organize my tax records and deed documents in my home office. He had spent 4 hours in there, alone with my filing cabinets, claiming he was setting up a digital archive. Instead, he had photographed my identity papers and forged my path to ruin. At the Oak Valley Bank branch, the air smelled of stale coffee and carpet cleaner. I sat across from Teresa, the branch manager, who had handled my accounts for 10 years. Teresa, I need to see the original application for this HELOC, I said, placing the foreclosure notice on her desk. I never signed this. She looked at me with concern, her fingers tapping rapidly on her keyboard. Let me pull up the scanned documents, Lawrence. It was signed and notarized at our downtown branch. She turned the screen toward me. There it was, my signature, written in dark ink. It looked incredibly similar to mine, but the slant of the letters was slightly off. The document was notarized by a man named Todd Mercer. I knew that name. Todd Mercer was Jeff's college roommate, a notary public, who did freelance work for Jeff's real estate agency. The loan funds, $120,000, had been deposited into a joint account under the name Vance Family Trust. I had never opened that account. Teresa checked the signatures for the withdrawals. Every single dollar had been transferred out by Chloe Henderson and Jeff Henderson. They had submitted forged salary stubs claiming I earned $12,000 a month from a consulting business that didn't exist, and a forged tax return. The signature they used was copied from a medical release form I had signed during my knee surgery last winter, which Jeff had access to in my office files. They used your home as collateral, Lawrence, Teresa said, her voice dropping to a whisper. The loan was structured with a 5-year interest-only period, but the payments stopped after 3 months. Since you are the sole owner of the property, the liability falls entirely on you. If we don't receive the default payment, the bank will proceed with the foreclosure. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. The house I had built, the house where I had raised my children, was being stolen to fund my daughter's lifestyle. I had poured my sweat into these floorboards, and my family was using it as a disposable credit card. They had even hired an appraiser to inflate the home's value to $480,000 to justify the credit line. I thanked Teresa, took copies of the forged documents, and drove to the office of Roger Finch. Roger was a seasoned civil attorney and a friend I had known for 30 years. Roger's late wife had been Carol's closest friend, and he knew how much this house meant to me. He sat in his leather chair, reviewing the paperwork through his reading glasses. This is a serious criminal matter, Lawrence, Roger said, shaking his head. But it is also very clear. You are 67 years old. In this state, taking or appropriating the property of an individual who is 65 or older for a wrongful use constitutes elder financial abuse under California Welfare and Institutions Code, Section 1561030. And because Jeff forged your signature on the loan deed, he violated California Penal Code Section 470. Roger leaned forward, tapping the contract. Because of the forgeries, this entire agreement is void ab initio. A contract created through forgery is invalid from its inception. The bank cannot legally enforce a foreclosure against your home because you never entered into the contract. However, we have to file a civil complaint to declare the contract void, and we must report this to the sheriff's department. The law is very clear on this. A forged deed is a complete nullity, and the court will issue an immediate injunction to stop the foreclosure. In addition, Todd Mercer, as a commissioned notary, has violated California Government Code Section 8214(1) by false notarization, making him personally liable for damages. I sat in the quiet office, listening to the legal terms: forgery, elder abuse, void ab initio. These were the weapons I needed. I didn't want to scream or throw fists. I wanted the law to do the talking. "How long do we have before the bank takes action?" I asked. "We can file the injunction by next week," Roger replied. "But we need to serve them. We should serve both Chloe and Jeff. If we do it right, they won't have time to hide the assets they bought with your money." I knew exactly what they had bought. Donald had told me that Chloe and Jeff had recently purchased a luxury cabin in Big Bear, boasting to everyone that Jeff had closed a massive commercial deal. They had also booked the grand ballroom at the Oak Ridge Inn for their annual Christmas Eve gala, inviting over 80 people, including Jeff's wealthiest real estate clients. They were using my stolen home equity to parade as high society. "Let's file the lawsuit," I told Roger, "and I want them served on Christmas Eve at the gala." Roger looked at me, a slow smile spreading across his face. "If that's how you want to play it, Lawrence, we will make sure the paperwork is flawless. We will also coordinate with the sheriff's department regarding the criminal forgery charges, so they are ready to question Jeff on the spot. It will be a public exposure they cannot escape." The next step was cutting off the quiet money. For 5 years, I had maintained an automatic monthly transfer of $4,500 from my savings to Chloe's event business account. She had told me it was a family contribution to help build a legacy for my grandkids. I had never questioned it. I logged into my online banking and canceled the transfer. I also canceled the monthly auto payments of $250 for Chloe's SUV lease and the $150 gym membership that she had asked me to co-sign 3 years ago and had quietly left on my card. I then contacted the florist, the decorator, and the rental company for the Christmas gala. I had been paying their invoices through auto-pay accounts for 10 years. I called each vendor and explained that I was closing my accounts. I told them that if Chloe Vance Henderson wanted to maintain the bookings for the gala, she would need to set up new accounts in her own name, using her own credit card. On Wednesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Chloe. Her voice was no longer bright and artificial, it was sharp with panic. "Dad, what did you do?" she screamed. "My business card was just declined at the printers, and the florist says the centerpieces for the gala are canceled because your account is closed. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? The gala is in 10 days. I am reorganizing my expenses, Chloe," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I will no longer pay for services I did not authorize." "You did authorize them," she yelled. "You always pay for Christmas. You're trying to ruin this for the kids because of some pathetic grudge. If we don't have the decorations, the whole night is ruined. Jeff has clients coming. The Millers from across the street are coming, and we cannot look like failures in front of them." "If the gala is that important to Jeff's clients," I replied, "then Jeff can pay for it. I am done." I hung up before she could reply. Within minutes, my phone lit up with messages. My cousins called me selfish. An uncle sent a text telling me that at my age, I shouldn't let money ruin family ties. I read them all, feeling the familiar twinge of guilt, but then I looked at the foreclosure notice on my kitchen counter. The guilt vanished. My sister Martha had always warned me, "Lawrence, you are buying their presents. That is not a family, that is a theater." I had ignored her for years, but now I knew she was right. On Friday night, a car pulled into my driveway. I heard heavy footsteps on my porch, followed by a loud, aggressive knock. I opened the door to find Jeff standing there, his face red, his jaw tight. He stepped into my living room without being asked, smelling of expensive cologne and whiskey. "What the hell are you doing, Lawrence?" he demanded, pointing a finger at me. "Chloe is crying her eyes out. We have a reputation to maintain in this town." You can't just pull the plug on the event 2 weeks before Christmas. You made a commitment. I made no commitment to fund your lifestyle, Jeff, I said, folding my arms. And I certainly didn't make a commitment to pay for a party where I am told to sit in the corner and keep my mouth shut. Jeff sneered, stepping closer. You're an old, retired carpenter, Lawrence. You don't know how the real world works. We carry this family. We give the kids a future. You're just a wallet that sits in the corner. If you don't call the bank and reinstate the accounts by Monday, you won't be seeing your grandkids again. Think about how that looks to the neighbors. You will be sitting in your empty house, completely alone, with nobody to talk to. We will make sure Lily and Toby forget who you are. I walked to the front door and opened it, letting the freezing winter air rush in. The contracts have names on them, Jeff. Whoever wants the party can put their own name on the line. Good night. He glared at me, then stormed out into the snow. An hour later, Donald came over. He sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. Dad, Chloe called me, he said quietly. She asked for a $15,000 loan to cover the Oak Ridge Inn ballroom. She said you were losing your mind. Donald pulled out his phone and showed me a text message from Chloe. It read, Dad is acting senile and refusing to pay. He's just an old checkbook we have to tolerate until he passes, but he's ruining the family name. Can you loan us the money? I felt the words like a physical blow. A senile checkbook. I looked at Donald. What did you say? I told her no, Donald said, his voice firm. I told her I stand with you. I'm deleting the text because I don't want to carry her poison anymore. We are going to finish this the right way, Dad. I remember how she used to treat us when Mom was sick, acting like she was the manager of our lives while we did all the real work. I am not letting them do this to you anymore. You built this home, you worked 60 hours a week to send her to a private college, and this is how she repays you. It stops now. By the time Christmas Eve arrived, the ground was covered in a thick blanket of snow. The Oak Ridge Inn was lit with 1,000 warm golden lights, looking like a picture from a holiday card. Over 80 guests had arrived, filled with laughter and the sound of clinking glasses. Chloe was wearing a green velvet dress, playing the perfect hostess, laughing with the Millers and Jeff's business associates. But behind her smile, she was frantic. The venue manager, a woman named Brenda, was waiting in the lobby with a folder. The remaining balance for the ballroom and the catering was $18,000, and the inn's policy required payment before the main course was served. Chloe had tried to charge it to her business card, but the transaction was declined due to insufficient funds. Dad will be here soon, Chloe whispered to Brenda, her voice tight. He always handles the final payments. Just wait until 6:00. I didn't dress in my old flannel shirt that night. I put on my best dark wool suit, the one I had kept in the back of my closet since Carol's funeral. My sister Martha drove me to the inn in her old Buick. We rode in silence, watching the wipers sweep the snow off the windshield. Lawrence, she said as we pulled up, you've carried this family's burdens for too long. Tonight they see who you really are. Be strong. I nodded, feeling a quiet confidence settle over me. As I walked through the double doors of the ballroom, the hum of conversation slowly quieted. People turned to look. I wasn't the old contractor sitting in the drafty corner. I stood straight, my head held high. Chloe saw me and rushed over, her face a mixture of relief and anger. Thank God you're here, she whispered, grabbing my sleeve. Brenda is waiting in the office. You need to go write the check for $18,000 right now. Jeff's boss is here. Mr. Kingsley is watching. Don't do this to us. We have the local business elite in this room, and if the bar closes, Jeff's career is over. I told you, Chloe, I said, my voice carrying over the quiet room. I am not paying for this party. Dad, stop it, she hissed. You're ruining Christmas. You always make things awkward. Just pay the bill and we can talk about this tomorrow. You're making a scene in front of our guests. Before she could say another word, a tall man in a plain suit stepped out of the crowd. It was Peter, the process server Roger had hired. He walked up to Chloe and Jeff, holding two thick blue folders. Chloe Henderson? Jeff Henderson? He asked. Yes, what is this? Jeff asked, his broker smile faltering. You've been served, Peter said, handing the folders to them. A civil summons and complaint for elder financial abuse and damages. At that moment, Roger Finch entered the ballroom accompanied by two uniformed deputies from the sheriff's department. The room went dead silent. The music seemed to fade into the background. Roger stepped forward, his voice clear and commanding, addressing the room so that every guest could hear. "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson," Roger announced, "this lawsuit is filed on behalf of Lawrence Vance. The complaint alleges that you committed elder financial abuse under California Welfare and Institutions Code, Section 156101030T, by forging his signature on a $120,000 home equity line of credit against his primary residence. Under California Penal Code Section 470, forgery is a serious offense. Because the signature on the loan deed was forged, the agreement is void ab initio. It is legally invalid from the beginning. We have also submitted evidence of forgery to the district attorney, including the fake notary stamp from Todd Mercer." The guests gasped. Mr. Albright, a prominent local bank board member who was standing next to the Millers, stared at Jeff in horror. Mr. Kingsley, Jeff's senior business partner, slowly backed away, his face dark with anger. "A forged HELOC?" Mr. Albright muttered. "On your own father's house? That is unbelievable. And they used a fake notary?" Jeff's face went from red to a ghostly white. He looked at the deputies, then at the blue folder in his hands. "This is a mistake," he stammered. "This is a family matter. Lawrence, tell them this is a misunderstanding. We were going to pay it back." "There is no misunderstanding, Jeff," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "You forged my name to steal the equity in the home I built. You used my life savings to buy your cabin and pay for this party, while telling everyone I was just a burden who got in the way. You even submitted forged salary documents to complete the fraud. You wanted to make me look senile so nobody would believe me." One of the deputies stepped forward, gesturing to Jeff. "Mr. Henderson, we have a warrant for your questioning regarding the forged notary stamp and the loan application. Please step outside with us." Jeff looked around the room, but none of his wealthy clients would meet his eye. Mr. Kingsley shook his head in disgust. The Millers turned their backs. Jeff was led out of the ballroom in front of the entire gathering, his hands trembling as he clutched the legal folder. Chloe was left standing by the bar, holding the blue folder, her eyes wide with terror. Brenda, the venue manager, stepped up to her. "Since the original account holder canceled the payment and the contract is void, I need the $18,000 balance settled immediately, or we will have to close the event." Chloe looked at the crowd, but nobody offered to help. Mr. Kingsley walked toward the exit, followed by the rest of the clients. The guests began quietly gathering their coats and leaving in hushed silence. Within 30 minutes, the grand ballroom was empty, except for the decorations and the clean, untouched tables. The gala they had built on my stolen home was gone. The legal fallout was swift. The bank, realizing the loan was void ab initio due to the forgery, canceled the foreclosure proceedings against my home. They turned their legal team against Jeff and his notary friend, Todd Mercer. Jeff was indicted for grand theft and forgery. The trial took place at the county courthouse in April. I had to sit in the courtroom and testify about the forgery and how I felt when I discovered the theft. Jeff sat at the defense table with a cheap lawyer because he could no longer afford his high-priced attorney. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Evelyn Collins, was furious at Jeff's actions, calling it a despicable exploitation of an aging parent's trust. Jeff was sentenced to pay full restitution to the bank and was given 3 years of probation, along with 500 hours of community service. To pay the bank, he was forced to sell the Big Bear cabin and liquidate his remaining assets. The notary Todd Mercer was stripped of his license and faced criminal charges as an accomplice. The strain was too much for their marriage. Chloe and Jeff separated by the spring, their alliance crumbling the moment the stolen money ran out. Jeff's reputation in commercial real estate was completely destroyed, and he could no longer find work in the area. My house remained mine. The home I had built was safe. On Christmas Eve the following year, there was no grand ballroom. There was only my kitchen, warm and smelling of roasted turkey. I sat at the head of my table, not because I had paid to be there, but because I was home. Donald sat to my right, laughing with his girlfriend. Martha sat to my left, bossing me around about the gravy, and Chloe was there too. She had taken a job as a manager at a local retail store, working 40 hours a week, learning for the first time the value of $1. She sat quietly, helping set the plates, her hands empty of clipboards and demands. She was making small monthly payments of $250 to help pay back the legal expenses I had incurred. She walked over to the window where I was watching the snowfall. "I am sorry, Dad," she said, her voice soft and genuine. "I never looked at the bills. I just let him handle it. I was blind, and I was cruel." "I forgive you, Chloe," I said, putting my arm around her shoulder. "But you had to learn to stand on your own. I couldn't keep carrying you." At 67, I finally learned that you cannot buy your way into respect. You can only buy your way into being used. Love sometimes means letting the people you care about face the consequences of their own actions. I stood in my warm house, surrounded by my family, a free man. I watched the snow cover the driveway, knowing that the foundation under my feet was solid, built on truth rather than transactions.